Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. We recently marked the 250th anniversary of the start of the American Revolution. So how did Connecticut play a role here, and what are some of the revolution's undertold stories? With me now to share some insight and history about all of this, Jennifer Matos and Christine Pittsley. Both of you are from the Museum of Connecticut History. Thank you both so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I want to start off with, whoever kind of wants to take this, what the Museum of Connecticut History actually is. Give us a little bit of background on the museum.
Sure. So the Museum of Connecticut History is located within the Connecticut State Library. We're located right across the street from the state capitol in Hartford, and the museum was actually established as part of the State Library in 1910.
Wow.
Our collection strengths and what we collect, preserve, and exhibit for future generations relate to three categories of collections. We collect primarily political, military, and industrial history.
And so I would say kind of all three of those relate to, the start of the revolution. But, Christine, what are some of those different exhibits, within those three categories? What do you kind of always have on for people to come and look at?
So one of our main exhibits is our Memorial Hall, which is sort of the centerpiece of our museum. And it's this absolutely gorgeous space. And we have the Charter of Connecticut, which is the 1662 charter that just came back from conservation recently. We also have all the governor's portraits there. And then my personal favorite is the military collection. We've got a small exhibit in there. I think Jen's probably favorite is the industrial.
Yes, we recently put on display all the different products made in Connecticut that relate to kitchens. So we actually have a 1920s stove and refrigerator on display, in addition to lots of other really cool products that a lot of people have grown up with, or their parents have grown up with, or their grandparents have grown up with.
Might not even realize or made or started
in Connecticut, And then the other section of that exhibit, which is called Small But Mighty, Connecticut Makes History, is the political section. So we do collect things that relate both to our state's politics and politicians, as well as on a national level if they've had a Connecticut connection. So that's always really fun to look at too.
Absolutely. And I know, for most residents, they know how old of a state Connecticut is. But, when I was covering back a few weeks ago, as I mentioned, with the 250th anniversary, when I was talking just broadly about it, the start of the revolution, specifically the battles of Lexington and Concord, kicking off the war, I think a lot of people, when they think about the start of the revolution, they think about Boston and Paul Revere. But, we know Connecticut had ties here. Can you tell us a little bit about the start of the war and just kind of generally Connecticut's role in it, how our state has some ties there?
Yeah, I would like to, I'll start just by telling you a little bit more of the general history, and then I think Christine can fill in with some of the more specifics. So basically, Lexington and Concord was April 19th. So we know through state records in the state archives at the Connecticut State Library that the General Assembly met on April 26th for a special meeting to decide what to do. They were hearing about all of this, and they actually passed an act that created the militia for the colony of Connecticut. They, obviously we hadn't separated yet from Great Britain, but they really recognized the threat that they were seeing in Massachusetts, and so they actually deployed and set up an entire militia system, including naming the different generals and everything, the different regiments. And the second thing that they did that day was decide that they would send a message to the governor of Massachusetts. His name was General Thomas Gage. He was the one who was kind of perpetrating a lot of the violence on the British side that was happening in Massachusetts. And so Connecticut kind of makes this last-ditch effort to make amends, right? They want this to be a peaceful resolution, and so they just they send a letter to him, which we also have in our collection, written by Governor Jonathan Trumbull to Governor Gage of Massachusetts, and kind of lays out that Connecticut is a friend of Massachusetts, and the people are very concerned about what's happening. And while they seek resolution and they would hate to take up arms against the sovereign, right, King George III, they were absolutely prepared to defend themselves, to defend Connecticut from the British, and also to help their brethren in need.
Wow. And you said you have that letter to the Massachusetts governor.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And Christine?
I would say for Connecticut, really, the first moment we marked on Monday at the Old State House, which is the beginning of the expedition to Ticonderoga. And that was something I had to learn about, which was kind of fun. And we have a ton of documents in our collection talking about the 20 men from Connecticut that sort of decided they were going to just head up to Ticonderoga, really led by 3 men who took it upon themselves to get the money together to do this. And they went and met up with Ethan Allen, who was a Connecticut native, and Benedict Arnold, and by May 10th, an entire company of Connecticut men had made it to Ticonderoga, which includes a number of indigenous men. So we recently found a logbook from later at Ticonderoga, but it lists out the names of about 9 or 10 indigenous men that were there. So, we find these things all the time in our collections. And it just adds to the richness of what we know about Connecticut's early participation.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I know we had mentioned some of those, undertold stories. As we mentioned, this was something that you just had to learn about when we were marking the start of those men marching up there. But having those indigenous men included, I would assume is something probably a lot of people don't know about. I didn't know about that. Can you share with us some more of those undertold stories? I know you had mentioned before women, other people of color, and even some regular soldiers versus famous ones, if there's anything, that really comes to mind for you as significant here.
Yeah, the one that's coming to mind right away while we're talking about indigenous soldiers is we have a flag in the collection of the Museum of Connecticut History that is a 2nd Dragoons. So this was a mounted group. And it's a beautiful example of a flag from the 18th century, which you can imagine not many of them exist today. It's actually on loan right now at the Museum of the American Revolution. And through our research, through Sheldon's Dragoons, Sheldon was the leader, we found evidence of a few Native American men who actually served with them. And in fact, they were such an elite force that a handful of them were selected to escort George Washington during the surrender of Lord Cornwallis. Wow. So very much indigenous people were present and they were fighting for America's freedom.
Wow, yeah. And Christine, is there anything, for you that sticks out?
So we have found a few letters in our collections from normal soldiers. These are the guys you don't read about in history. They weren't generals, they weren't winning battles, but they were experiencing them. And there's one from a young man, I think he was about 18 years old, writing home from the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he's telling his mother about all of what he's seen, what happened when they were attacked. And then all of the people that he knew that were wounded, how they were wounded. He gets kind of graphic.
Sure.
But this is a letter that's just kind of been hanging out and not really used or paid attention to. So one of the things we really want to do is bring these stories out and show that it wasn't just men like Washington and Governor Trumbull and General Worcester. There were also the normal men and women involved. And I think one of Jen's favorite stories is Marianne Wolcott.
Oh, right. Yeah, Marianne Wolcott was the daughter of Oliver Wolcott. He later became governor of Connecticut, but at this point he was a general. She lived in the small town of Litchfield, Connecticut. And in our exhibit, there will be, and we also have in our collection, a fragment of this piece of a sculpture of King George III. It was in New York City when the Declaration of Independence was read shortly after July 4th, 1776. The people became incensed, and with a bit of fervor, they decided to tear down the sculpture, cut it into pieces, and send it to Litchfield, Connecticut, to be melted into bullets that would be fired back at the British. And Marianne Wolcott and a lot of members of her family and people from the community of Litchfield actually took those chunks of the King George III sculpture, melted them down in the foundry, and formed little musket balls.
Wow.
So really, it was a really all hands on deck kind of effort.
Absolutely. And coming off of that, I know Connecticut became known as the provisions state. Can you share a little bit about why it got that moniker?
I'm going to let Christine take that one.
Connecticut was fertile ground.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of crops being grown here and a lot of munitions being made here. We are a hub of the firearms industry because of really historic ties.
Right.
So because Governor Trumbull was so active in all of this, he formed great relationships with the Continental Army, and suddenly we were just providing the Continental Army and the Connecticut forces with a lot of the products that they needed, from foodstuffs to forage for the horses to cannons from Salisbury, Connecticut.
Wow.
The whole iron industry up in the Litchfield Hills was really important. We also supplied the French Army. As the French Army marched through Connecticut in 1781, we were providing them with horses and flour for their bread and meat and all sorts of rum and cider, which was also provided to, we have records showing what rum and beer provisions were given to soldiers.
Yeah. Wow. So really producing a whole lot for the war. Wow. Well, so in our last minute here, I know you mentioned this is going to be kind of coming to the museum as an exhibit. So can you both of you just kind of quickly tell me what people need to be on the lookout for and anything you want them to know now about, how the museum is going to be telling these stories very soon?
Oh, absolutely. So we are in the planning stages of an exhibit called Connecticut's Revolution. And this is really a statewide exhibit that will focus on Connecticut's contributions during the time period of the American Revolution, both before, during, and after. And really thinking about how Connecticut contributed and was affected by the Revolution, and then how also the Revolution was affected by Connecticut. If people are looking forward to the coming anniversary, the exhibit is actually slated to open on July 4th, 2026, Saturday, and it will be up for a whole year. The Museum of Connecticut History is open in the meantime if you'd like to come visit, not wait a whole year. We're open Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and we are always free admission, so please come join.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Christine, it's going to be open just before this exhibit, this special exhibit comes. So what do you want people to know about if they want to stop by?
Oh, that's a tough one because there's so much that we're always there and willing to answer any questions that people might have. We have a lot of information out there, but there's always more that can be learned.
Well, Christine, Jennifer, thank you both so much for sharing this with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That does it for us here now on The Real Story. But if you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the Fox 61 News app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61. Have a great morning.